Good morning and welcome to ABG's Life Science Summit. My name is Adam Carlson. I am a equity research analyst covering pharmaceutical and biotech companies. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear from over 50 companies, ranging from smaller biotech and medtech companies to more established pharmaceutical and medtech companies. We're running dual tracks on this channel, primarily biotech companies, and on track 2, primarily medtech and life science tool companies. With the exception of our fireside chats with AstraZeneca, Novo Nordisk, and Sobi, the format is company presentation for around 20 minutes, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A. And I'm pleased to welcome our first company, Hansa Biopharma, and we're joined by Hansa's CEO, Søren Tulstrup. Hansa is a Swedish-listed commercial stage company, market cap around 2.5 billion Swedish krona, leveraging its enzyme modulation platform to enable modulation of autoantibody levels in kidney transplants, initially with its recently launched imlifidase, but also in rare antibody-mediated autoimmune conditions and gene therapies. I'll pass over the word to Søren.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your interest in Hansa Biopharma. Before I start my presentation, just the usual warning that the presentation today contains forward-looking statements, and as such, you should apply appropriate caution. I'm sure some of you are not too familiar with Hansa Biopharma, so here's a snapshot overview of the company. The company was founded back in 2007 as a spin-out from Lund University. And what led to the foundation of the company was the identification, the discovery of an enzyme today known as imlifidase that has the unique property that it very fast and effectively cleaves immunoglobulin G. And it was thought that that could have therapeutic relevance. If you then fast forward 15, 16 years, today we're a commercial stage company with our first product on the market in Europe under the brand name Idefirix. That's in kidney transplantation. We've also moved into autoimmune diseases, where we've generated what we think is very strong proof of concept in a disease called anti-GBM or Goodpasture's disease. And we've moved into the gene therapy space through partnering with Sarepta Therapeutics and also Bayer. Just looking at Idefirix in Europe, we think that there is very significant commercial potential. This is the first and only product approved to desensitize these so-called highly sensitized patients that have a hard time finding an organ that's a good enough fit for them. And they typically die waiting for an organ transplant rather than be transplanted. So there's a high degree of unmet medical needs. We've also, as I just said, moved into autoimmune diseases with anti-GBM, but there's a host of other diseases in that space, and we have an ongoing phase 2 program in another disease called Guillain-Barre Syndrome. And we're also looking at post-transplant situations where there are issues with organ rejection. We have grown quite considerably over the past few years as we've become commercial stage. Today we have approximately 150 employees throughout Europe as well as in the US. We last raised capital back in the summer of 2020, and we're financed well into 2023. So the past couple of years obviously have been quite challenging for humankind in general, given the pandemic and the war in Europe, etc. But it's actually been a pretty successful period for Hansa Biopharma. We have moved forward according to plan with the launch in Europe, getting market access, pricing and reimbursement at the appropriate price point. Most recently, we got the pricing and reimbursement in Germany. We've also gotten early access in France. We've started to partner with companies to look at markets outside of the EU where we can leverage the EU approval, like Israel and Switzerland. We've also partnered looking at our platform activities with a number of different companies. I mentioned Bayer and also Sarepta Therapeutics in the gene therapy space. We've also partnered with Agenix looking at the autoimmune disease space and transplant area. And the organization is certainly a very experienced one, but also a highly motivated one. We've now, for 2 years in a row, been certified as a great place to work based on employee feedback. So just one slide on the platform, and essentially we have a number of different enzymes. They all have the same mode of action. They cleave immunoglobulin G, and they cleave all 4 subtypes, and they're specific to IgG. They do not touch other immunoglobulins. And what happens is that the molecule is essentially decapitated, if you will, just below the so-called hinge section, creating a FAP2 and an FC component, thereby rendering the molecule inactive almost immediately, so that within a couple of hours from a 15-minute infusion, there is essentially no activity. You can see that levels of IgG drop down below detectable levels. And they stay down there for approximately 7 days before gradually bouncing back. And then within a month or so, you're back to normal. So imlifidase is produced by a human pathogen, and it's very efficacious, as you just saw. It's also well tolerated generally. It has one drawback, and that is the fact that since it comes from a human pathogen, it is immunogenic, and therefore we're not developing it for very frequent dosing. But just looking at single dosing indications and infrequent dosing opportunities, there's quite a few of those. Already we're active in the transplant space, as you can see here with the kidney, but in addition to the kidney, there's obviously other organs like lung and heart, where you have similar issues with the sensitization. We're also active in the autoimmune disease space. I mentioned anti-GBM, where we have very strong proof of concept, but we also have an ongoing trial in Guillain-Barre Syndrome. These are hyperacute monophasic autoimmune diseases where essentially you only have one attack, and if you can deal with that successfully, the patient is generally well off. So they are kind of right in the sweet spot, but there are other similar types of indications in the broader autoimmune disease area. Then in the gene therapy space, the problem we're solving for is the presence of neutralizing antibodies against the AAV vectors, very frequently used by gene therapy companies to get the healthy gene into the cells. And here we are currently focused on Duchenne muscular dystrophy and limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And we're also now, through our Bayer partnering, focused on Pompe disease. But there's a very broad range of ongoing programs where you have significant issues with neutralizing antibodies against the AAV vectors used. So there's quite a significant opportunity in the broader space of gene therapy. And then lastly, there's also some oncology indications like hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, where we think imlifidase has potential. Then we're looking at another generation of enzymes that are less immunogenic, just as efficacious as imlifidase. That's the target product profile at least, and well tolerated, but less also immunogenic, so that they can be dosed more frequently. And that obviously opens up to a very broad universe of more chronic diseases, both in the autoimmune disease space and in the transplant space, the gene therapy space with multiple dosing, as well as in oncology. With so many different opportunities, obviously it's very important that you have clear priorities, and we have a very clear business model in place. This is what you see depicted on this slide. At the core of our business model, we have our enzymes, and they all have the same mode of action, as I said. Then as we develop these into drug candidates and approved products, we aim to essentially control most of the elements, the key elements in the value chain towards the market. Doesn't mean that we need to own them, but certainly we need to control them so that we get the majority of the upside, and also so that we can ensure successful launches. But then as we approach the launch time point, depending on whether it's a product in a space where we have most of the knowledge needed to succeed, and where it's generally relatively easy to operate because it's a concentrated target audience, etc. If that is the case, we will by default try to launch ourselves in most of the countries. If that's not the case, then we will partner. If we need access to complementary assets and so on, for instance, in the gene therapy space or in the oncology space, we will seek to partner to have our partner essentially really help with the launch, or maybe take care of the launch altogether, and in some cases also late-stage development. Let me say a few words about our lead asset, Idefirix, for kidney transplantation. As I said, there is a very significant commercial opportunity, we think, in Europe first and in other geographies later. Looking at the European Union, where we have approval currently, the label we have is desensitization therapy of highly sensitized patients that are unlikely to be transplanted and who have an organ from a deceased donor. That is actually a pretty significant opportunity, even though it is, of course, restricted. It is quite significant. Generally, it's agreed that if you have what is called a CPRA rate of more than 80%, you're highly sensitized. That's 10 to 15% of all patients on the wait list, and quite a significant part of them are unlikely to be transplanted. And the majority of transplants taking place today are from deceased donors. So just looking at the European landscape and here also the US landscape, there are approximately between the two countries, you have a little bit less than 200,000 patients on the wait list. Given the fact that there's an undersupply of organs, it's only 1 in 4, 1 in 5 that are actually transplanted. Over the past few years, the number has grown. Last year, or in 2020, which is the last year on this slide, there was an impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, but in general, it's been growing over the past few years. And so just looking at that, you're looking at how many patients that are on the wait list, you take into consideration the fact that there's an undersupply of organs. You have an addressable patient population in each of the two major geographies, Europe and the US, of approximately 3,000 to 4,000. So altogether 6,000 to 8,000. And we'll get a proportion of these patients. But we won't get them from day one. When you launch a very innovative product, you really need to put the infrastructure in place, change the mindset, etc. So initially what we're doing, we're really focused on the leading transplant centers. We are making them clinically ready, commercially ready, and then we want them to use the product in the right patients and have good first experiences. Typically, they will wait a number of months, having treated the first patient, before they decide to continue and use it on a second and consecutive patients. So that's why what we're looking at really is an S-shaped launch curve, where in the second phase, when we're moving into more exponential growth, you're getting repeat business in the centers, and you're also getting new countries providing market access by giving price and reimbursement. And in the later years, we will also aim to broaden the label and so on. So that's why you see some growth also in the later stages. This is a map of Europe, just to give a snapshot overview of where we stand in terms of market access. As I said, initially, we have now gotten access in quite a number of countries, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, most recently Germany. We also accessing the French market through an early access program. We're in discussions with NICE in the UK and with the authorities in Spain and Italy and so on. And we expect that by the end of this year, we will have access to the majority of the countries in Europe. In the US, we have agreed with the FDA to run a pivotal phase 3 trial. It's going to be, or it is ongoing, so I can say it is a relatively small trial in 64 patients, where they will be randomized when they get an organ offer. They're highly sensitized. They get an organ offer. They will then, and if not a good enough fit, they will be randomized to either desensitization therapy using imlifidase in the active arm, or in the comparator arm, standard of care, which for the majority of these patients will be to just wait through the study period, which is 12 months. Hoping against hope that an organ that's a good enough fit will be made available so that they can be transplanted. And we're using EGFR as a surrogate marker of efficacy. If the patients are not transplanted, they have allocated a value of 0. So it's highly powered to show benefit in the active arm, even though it's a small trial. We're currently enrolling patients here. We aim to have it fully enrolled by the end of the year and have high-level data readout by the end of next year, so that we can submit a BLA under the accelerated approval pathway in the US in the first half of 2024. Snapshot overview of our pipeline. It is a rich pipeline already, even though we're a young company. Idefirix already approved in Europe, moving forward with a pivotal trial in the US. And then there are other geographies as well we're looking at. Then we have ongoing trials in AMR, which is a post-transplant indication, Guillain-Barre Syndrome, anti-GBM. Here we're starting a pivotal trial. We have agreed with the FDA and the EMA to run a pivotal trial in 50 patients. And then in the gene therapy space, it's still preclinical work with Sarepta as well as with Bayer. With Sarepta, the work has progressed quite a lot, and we hope that the animal studies will be concluded this year, and then it's up to Sarepta to take a decision how to move this forward. And then the next generation enzymes, the so-called NICE program. Here we're doing IND-enabling tox studies right now, and we aim to have these completed by this year. So I think I've talked to this already. We have a platform that's quite versatile and flexible, can be used in multiple broad indication universes. Right at the center, we have these enzymes. We can also combine them with other products that also target IgG. We can use them hopefully both in an acute setting as well as in a more chronic setting. And we're active in autoimmune diseases, transplantation, oncology, and gene therapy. Just one slide to underline that, as I said initially, we really have generated a very strong proof of concept for the whole platform in the autoimmune disease space, looking at IgG driven autoimmune diseases such as anti-GBM. And here is just the high level readout, if you will, of the results from this phase 2 trial with 15 patients. Normally, 2 out of 3 patients end up in dialysis. When we started this trial, 2 out of 3 of the patients in the trial were already on dialysis. Using then imlifidase, we were able to prevent all of the patients that hadn't progressed to dialysis from progressing, and even some of the patients that were already on dialysis were able to be taken off of dialysis. So that's really very, very strong data, albeit in a limited number of patients. The AMR trial is ongoing right now, just like the Guillain-Barre Syndrome trial, phase 2 trial. We're looking to enroll 30 patients. We have 29 at this point, so it should be fully enrolled very soon. And then we should have data, high-level data, in the second half of this year, which we're certainly looking very much forward to. Other milestones looking forward is Guillain-Barre Syndrome. Also, we should have that fully enrolled this year, and a readout then 6 months after. Looking, to 23, we should have data from the ConfIdeS trial, the US pivotal trial in kidney transplant, and a BLA submission in the US in the first half of 24. We've not put the gene therapy milestones here because it's still too uncertain, but we also expect hopefully very exciting news in that space over the coming years. So we have had a couple of very interesting and successful years behind us now, and now we're looking into an equally exciting future. And that's all. I'll hand back over to you, moderator.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that presentation. A few questions then. First one, you referenced your European label, deceased donors, highly sensitized, typically cut off being above 80 on the CPRA. And I'm just curious, with the pricing reimbursement discussions you're having, how, and I know you can't give precise details, but how broadly aligned is the label to the populations that you're being reimbursed for? Are you quite happy that you're getting a similar sort of addressable patient population as relates to the CPRA score or other parameters?
Overall, yes, we're quite happy with the outcome of our discussions with the payers in the different European countries. Obviously, they differ, right? There will be different perspectives and so on. But in general, certainly it's within label, right? So it's not a new population. It's a patient set that we think will have good results from using imlifidase. And it certainly gives enough room, if you will, so that you can actually maneuver and make sure that the product has an uptake in the different countries. There will always be restrictions, and that will vary from country to country. But in general, I would say we're quite happy with where we stand.
Good. And deceased donors is on the label now. And just curious to hear plans you're thinking around living donor donations. The AMR study, as I understand, is in fact at least partly, right? Including living donor donations as well. So you're generating some data there. What would the kind of process be for expanding the label into that subset of transplantations?
So right now, initially, we've chosen specifically to focus on the patients with the highest degree of unmet medical need, and that is patients with an organ from a deceased donor, because today you don't have any remedies that will essentially enable them to accept an organ that's not a good enough fit. You don't have enough time to treat them. But certainly we also see potential in the living donor space. If you have a living donor and that person is not a good fit with you, it would be great if you could desensitize the recipient so that the transplant could take place. That will also increase the number of organs being put into the pool, if you will, and the number of transplants taking place. So clearly that's something we are looking at, not in the immediate short term, but certainly over time we expect that something will be, this will be a real market opportunity.
Okay. And we've gotten news of positive reimbursement decisions in Germany and France in recent times. And on the Q1 call, you're quite upbeat on the progress overall in Germany. Not perhaps sales necessarily, but the progress you're making there, and just considering the sort of the lead time between a favorable reimbursement and until clinics are up and running, and you might see that on the P&L. How much, if anything, should we sort of be expecting from these particular Germany and France recently approved markets in Q1?
Well, I would say, now we're in Q2. I would say we certainly expect sales from both countries this year, but it's impossible to predict what quarter you will have sales, and you'll have very volatile sales because the value of one patient is very high. It's 3 million Swedish kronor, 300,000 euros, and the number of patients is low, and it's a one-off therapy. So you'll see this kind of sales. Typically, there's clearly a lead time from getting market access, from getting pricing and reimbursement until you actually see the first patient treated. So it will not come immediately, but hopefully, certainly, we expect it this year. Yes.
Okay, good. And I think you've referenced it as well, if I remember correctly, in the Q1 call, that initial draft guidance from NICE, not recommending reimbursement, not unusual. As I understand in terms of how that process often goes. But you seemed, upbeat as well on the potential to secure reimbursement in the UK. Then, compared to then, has anything changed? Are you still hopeful for reimbursement in the UK?
We're absolutely still hopeful. It's always a tough battle to negotiate with NICE, as everyone knows. But we think we have a very good case. We have strong local support. Most recently, actually, we were nominated as one of 3 products for best pharmaceutical product in the UK in the Prix Galien UK award ceremony. So there's clearly focus on this product, the opportunities and the benefits, and so we think that in the end, NICE will say yes, and we'll be able to agree. But it's always a process that you have to go through, and sometimes it takes. Not that long, and sometimes it takes longer.
Yep. And is there any thinking in terms of clinical trial sites clinical experience in the UK, perhaps less than in some of the other key markets, if I recall, perhaps not. Does that feed into it at all? That the UK is sort of less accustomed to imlifidase in terms of that negotiating process being more drawn out?
I don't think so. I mean, it's a very tight-knit international community, and we have very good supporters in the UK. It's just a question of different processes and different approaches from the authorities, and so as I said, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to get market access in the UK as well.
Good. And in terms of funding needs, you're funded well into 2023. I believe you said in the Q1 call, and you've also had this message of sort of exploring various options for financing, presumably suggesting something other than equity. And I'm wondering if there's anything more you can say there in terms of what are those options. Presumably, debt financing would be one of them. Are things like selling royalty rights or things like that, more atypical things, seriously being considered as well, or how should we be thinking about that?
I mean, I think all biotech companies are operating in these choppy waters right now in the biotech sector. I mean, you're forced to look at several different options, right? And we're certainly doing that. We're in a very good shape given the progress we have in our business, given the fact that our platform is validated, given we have a product on the market, etc. We're a mature company, so it's just a question of finding the optimal solution in this situation. And obviously, you're looking at apart from equity, you're looking at structured financing. You're looking at other sources of non-dilutive capital. We're very focused on not diluting our assets at this point in time. We think we're best placed to develop them and get the benefit out of them.
Okay, good. Maybe just one last question. You've spoken about guideline work, the ESOT guidelines, and getting imlifidase in there, the progress on that side of things, and how material do you think that would be? I mean, as you're saying, it's a small, tight-knit community and so on, and presumably people are sort of well aware of imlifidase. How big of a difference is it being formally included in that guideline, would you say?
It is certainly helpful. Initially, what is critically important is that you have local protocols in these specific centers, right? So we're working very closely with the leading centers across Europe, and that is happening as we speak. But in addition to that, it's certainly supported also to have European-wide guidelines. And here we're working with the European Society of Organ Transplantation. There's a specific task force in place looking at updating guidelines, putting guidelines in place specifically for desensitization treatment of highly sensitized patients, because that really hasn't taken place in Europe so far. And that's going to be helpful, absolutely. Short term, you will not see any immediate impact, but over the next years, absolutely. This is really helpful, and I'm very encouraged by the support we're seeing and the seriousness this is approached with.
Perfect. I think we're at time. Søren, thank you very much for an interesting presentation.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Thank you.